Good morning. My name is Marco Peter. As you probably can tell from my accent, English is not my first language, is my second or actually my third language. I'm based in Zurich. I've been with Red Hat for 13 years, so quite a long time if you consider Red Hat's journey. I've seen a lot of growth in the 13 years I've been here. I run an organization that basically looks at all the subscription value we provide, so be it support, be it security, be it documentation, translations, and also the quality assurance. So we are, and I'll talk about that later a little bit, we're configured slightly different, right? Because I am responsible basically for the experience you have as a customer, which including quality assurance is actually an interesting topic. So it's part of an engineering organization, but really responsible for what we do with you. But first, before we jump into digital transformation, let's talk about the elephant in the room. IBM and Red Hat to combine to create leading hybrid and multi-cloud provider. So I think you all probably saw it 2 weeks ago, and some of us are probably still going through the shock of this announcement. But if you kind of digest it, there's like two areas that I think are important to understand. It's on the left side and on the right side. So if you look on the business side, right, Red Hat, we have a huge potential with IBM to really accelerate the expansion of our product portfolio, right? As in also getting the reach through like the bigger company IBM. And like that said, cross-selling opportunities, opening different industries, different customers. So that's a good opportunity from the business side, right? If you look at the other side, which I think is really important as well, Red Hat grew as an open source company. We're committed to open source. A lot of us that are at Red Hat, we are there because of open source. And so we got there, and open source, as you heard initially, it's not just a license, it's actually a method on how to run a company as well. And so that's what we are committed to, and I know IBM knows that this is what keeps the spirit of Red Hat together, and they can't stomp that out. We will operate as an independent company. Again, very important because otherwise our culture, and you'll hear about the culture in the presentation I do about digital transformation and the open organization. So I just wanted to get this out of the room and kind of make sure it's something that's happening, right? Being acquired is part of the deal, So let me go into talk about the digital transformation and the open organization. You know, like digital transformation, in my opinion, is the term is maybe a little bit misused, right? And everybody kind of understands about the digital transformation something new, something different, right? What is digital transformation? It's new set of capabilities. You got to build a different foundation for actually how you do things, right? You gotta react to a trend, or maybe you gotta lead a trend, but you gotta have different capabilities. The capabilities may be some technology, capabilities are also organizationally. How can you do these things, right? And it means change. It means change also how we all do our work, right? And that sometimes can be hard. Now, you are being disrupted, right? As in, a few years ago, right, I think people were kind of saying, well, there's no chance my business is getting disrupted, right? And I think some people actually, afterwards, some companies actually realized, yes, we are getting disrupted. And sometimes you don't get disrupted in the whole way. Like if you're a bank, right? There's very few startups that want to be a bank. The startups look at what's the profitable part of a company, right? What's the profitable piece, right? Be it payment, be it maybe mortgage selling, right? They're looking at that, and they go into that to actually disrupt you in that area. Now let me talk about, I'm from Switzerland, so we do ski resorts, right? Let me different topic, and you see it on the slides. So this ski resort is quite remote. It's called Saas-Fee. And they did 2 years ago, 3 years ago, they decided to disrupt the market. What they basically did, if you know a ski resort, they sell season passes, like $1,000, usually in that range, a little bit more, a little bit less. What Saas-Fee did, they did a crowdfunding, basically. In October, they said, if we can sell 100,000 season passes by October 15th, or a certain date, We'll sell it to you for 222 Swiss francs. Basically the same as dollars. Think about it. So they did it. So 100,000 people actually decided to buy a cheap season pass for $222. You know, what happened? It disrupted the whole market there, right? All of a sudden, 222 Swiss francs, if you go to another ski resort, like 10 minutes away from there, it gets you 2 days skiing, maybe 3 days skiing. So you get a whole season pass. So you think about this disruption, right? And what happened over the last 3 years? You can see there's some numbers, right? Obviously, overnight stays go up, hotels, food, lodging went up for that village. Huge. But is it? And this is important also, keeping in mind, this was a one-time disruption. They've done it since then every year. But you wonder, it's like, what happens to the other resorts? Some other ski resorts followed, right? They dropped the price. Does it have the same impact for the same resort, for the other resorts? Maybe not. Just keeping in mind, so this was just using different examples than usually the usual Uber, et cetera. You know, like, this is what can happen, right? If you're another ski resort, you got to react. You got to find the ways, what's the right strategy, right? And so that's what I'm saying is disruption can happen to all of us. Now, you see this statistics here. 90% of companies indicate that they're engaged in some form of digitization. Now, you see that term digitization, right? You've probably heard that in the early 2000s as well, right? There was the whole trend that people were saying, oh, we got to digitize our environment. Digitization and digital transformation, in my opinion, are two pairs of shoes. One is digitization is just make your operation smoother, right? Get the paperwork out of the way, kind of make it digital. Digital transformation can be, how do you actually change the business, right? How can you actually change your revenue streams, right? Only 16% said, we got a bold strategy, whatever that means, right? So I think the statistics speak for itself. Now, you wonder, Marco, what does Red Hat know about digital transformation, right? What do you know about disruption, right? It's probably something on your mind that, well, if I want to talk about digital transformation, I probably should go to one of the big consulting firms, right? Because they are smart, right? They know what's going on, what's happening, right? And obviously, digital transformation, you can go to every IT company today that talks about digital transformation, right? That's everybody, right? Even IBM talks about digital transformation. So what does Red Hat actually can talk about that? We disrupted an industry. If you look back at the timeline here, 93, Red Hat was founded. Red Hat was founded very early with just open source, our Linux distribution. In the early 2000s, it became an enterprise Linux distribution. We got into the market. And that's where we started disrupting a whole market of the Unix vendors, right? Remember HP, remember IBM, remember Sun, right? Big Unix shops, right? And very few of them do still have Unix around. You see the other disruptions in the market, but I just wanted to show this is why we believe we have a good story on why we can disrupt the market or why we have disrupted the market. Let me just put a few quotes here from, for example, from HP. We've taken this very, very seriously, and we are all in on the notion of open source. This is Martin Fink from HP, or Dr. Angel Diaz from IBM. That IBM is probably more honest here, right? As in, like, in the beginning, we needed to understand what open source meant, right? Kind of, I think this is a very honest statement. I want to highlight this one here on this slide from Microsoft, right? And keep in mind, when I started at Red Hat, there was still Steve Ballmer at Microsoft, and that was a whole different Microsoft. And now how Microsoft changed, and Microsoft has heritage here. We were a developer tools company first, and now, of course, we are all in on open source. And so this is disruption, what we disrupted the market. Now, let me go to kind of talk about how we disrupted the market. And I put this up here, plan, prescribe, execute. Traditionally, companies, and still a lot of companies, they build a plan, be it a 1-year plan, 3-year plan, 5-year plan. Then they prescribe how we actually will do these things, right? How do we measure it? What needs to be done? What each team does? And then we got to execute, right? And the execution is measured KPIs and all that area, right? So you have a real plan, right? You know, being from Switzerland, you would think, hey, I like this, right? It's very prescriptive. We can execute nicely on this. However, if you're in a market that changes very quickly, this doesn't work, right? So you got to find a different way, right? Planning everything out for the next 3 years, depending on the industry, maybe. But in the industry we are in, even planning for a year is actually going to be prepared to change plans quite a bit. So we talk about differently. We talk about configure, enable, engage. You know, instead of planning, you configure. What does that mean? Configure means put the right people and the right practices in place. You know, they keep your organization away on what's changing around them, right? Kind of like, this is the people aspect. Enabling is, you know, instead of prescribing, you tell them as like, okay, these are the boundaries. This is what we got to do, but let them actually make decisions. Give them authority, empower them, right? We got to give some frameworks, right? Otherwise, it might not go in the right direction. And then the engagement, right, is instead of measuring execution on every step, right, you kind of motivate people, you inspire them, kind of, you get the, you know, like expertise out of the groups to actually really get the benefit of the large organization. It's a much more powerful engine. If you look at it from a software perspective, right, you say configure is your architecture for the future, right? So that's where we talk about the platforms, be it OpenStack platform, be it an OpenShift platform, be it even a Linux platform that can give you more the agility you need, right? Enable is the agile processes. And this is not just agile versus waterfall. It's like, how do you bring more agility in your organization? You know, be open to different ways, right? Red Hat, we see that quite well. We have teams working in waterfall. We have teams working agile, with teams working in Kanban, like another agile way. There's different ways to do it. And having that flexibility seems chaotic, but it's very, very powerful. And then the engage is our culture, right? Red Hat's open source culture. Again, it's not just open source from a license perspective. How do you talk transparently to your team? How do you actually get your team out there that they can actually contribute, right? We do that at Red Hat quite well. Now, at this point, to make sure we kind of see this theory, or this kind of what we apply at Red Hat, how that actually works out with customers. So at this time, I would like to bring two very innovative customers on stage. One customer, MyRepublic, with Eugene Yeo, and David Robinson from STT Connect.
Tell me, do you want to go where it's coming on a color lines, where the runaways are running the night, impossible comes true, it's taking over you.
All right, why don't we move over a little bit here? So both of these companies, I'll ask them a few questions and kind of get them to kind of talk about how this configure, enable, engage really works in reality. So may I ask you to take a seat?
Thank you.
Let me start with you, Eugene. Can you just say a few words about what MyRepublic does? And then you've been a disruptor as a company. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure, happy to do so. Well, good morning, everyone. So MyRepublic is a company that was born out from right here in Singapore about 7 years ago. We were born out from what we call the NBN of Singapore, OpenNet at that time. And you know, we started selling fiber, leveraging on the infrastructure that the government provided. And over the years, we built up our capabilities and we started expanding into other markets in the region. And now we are operating in 4 markets in this Asia-Pacific region: Singapore, Indonesia, Australia, and New Zealand. So one of the key philosophies we have is that we are a firm believer of using IT as a strategic tool to help us gain a competitive advantage against our competition in the market and help us stay ahead in the game. Right? Our approach is very simple. It's about a balance of leveraging and building core expertise in areas such as software development and big data analytics in the telco space, whilst partnering with great companies like Red Hat in order to deliver maximum value to the organization. But with that, it has enabled us to be able to disrupt the industry, to be able to stay lean in the way we operate, as well as to be able to go to market more efficiently and effective in less time. So a great example of this was 7 years ago when we first started. As a small company at that time, cost was very important, and in order to be able to get started, we could not afford the huge cost that telco vendors cost basically to support the software stack. So what we did was we embraced open source, we embraced the cloud, we leveraged on public cloud a lot, and we built our IT carrier platform around the open source technology. And what started off as a necessity in order to allow us to operate in the market became a critical pillar of success for us today.
It's amazing. Just listening to you, right? Kind of building this is very fascinating. Yeah. Why did you decide to engage Red Hat?
That's a good question. So, we took a look at a lot of vendors at the time. And, we engaged Red Hat to help us to deploy the OpenStack platform, the self-storage as well as cloud forms, for us in order to create a modern and open hybrid cloud infrastructure. So the reason why we selected Red Hat was primarily because Red Hat was very close to the open source community, and they had deep expertise to help us in order to roll out the infrastructure layer that we wanted. And when we opened up in Australia, we had a need to build this open hybrid cloud to support us in our scaling and our growth in that market. And it was a very tight timeline. So with Red Hat's deep expertise and knowledge, the team helped us from planning all the way to execution. And we actually managed to do it within a span of 2 weeks, which was an amazing feat.
That's amazing, yeah. It's amazing how My Republic kind of expanded in different regions and so quickly, right? It's interesting to hear. If you look at these areas that you're expanding into, probably also in the future, what do you expect will change for your team in the future?
That's a good question. So change is inevitable for any organization today. And we've actually built change right into the core of our DNA from the very beginning. So in the way that we operate, the way that we grow and adapt as an organization, it really depends on the evolution of technology, the knowledge, as well as the experience that we gain. So as we expand into different markets, as we expand into different product lines, as we grow as an organization, we're going to constantly take that learnings and experience, and we're going to improve on the way that we do things. However, one thing I would like to note is there's one critical element that we probably won't want to change in the way that we work, which is keeping ourselves agile as an organization so that we can always stay ahead of the game.
Thank you. Thank you, Eugene. This is great to hear, and wish you good luck. I think your company is on a very, very good journey.
Thanks very much, Marco.
Thank you. Let me ask David a few questions. Can you introduce your company and kind of say what it does?
Yep, certainly. So STT Connect is a cloud enablement arm of ST Telemedia. For those, I'm sure everyone knows who ST Telemedia is, but just briefly, they're an investment arm of Temasek, so 100% owned. And they've been in this business for about 20 years, traditionally investing in the communications, media, and technology space. And in the last few years, there's been a larger push back into the data center business, as well as, of course, the establishment of Connect in 2016 for cloud, and of course, a number of other investments such as security, analytics, IoT. And really, our purpose is to build a secure open cloud. We're based in Singapore with an ASEAN focus and expanding into some additional markets next year.
Thank you, David. That's also pretty impressive for like an older company, older 20 years, right? They're kind of expanding like that.
Definitely a big change.
You heard me talk about plan, prescribe, execute, and configure, enable, and engage. How does this resonate for your company?
Actually, that's a very, very good question. We really have to sort of balance between the two. So certain days I feel a little bipolar or schizophrenic. Having a parent company that's a traditional investor, they really do like the plan, prescribe, and execute approach, and they like to have multi-year plans, lots of KPIs to go along with that. But we're in an industry where, in 3 years, actually in 12 months, things can change significantly. So we've had to balance that. So we've looked at it from really two main areas. We've looked at how do we establish the organisation in such a way that we maintain agility, that we can evolve and change, very, very quickly, whilst tapping into all of the knowledge of the staff, and again, having that collaborative approach. And then we've also looked at it from an architectural perspective. So we've embraced open source because that gives us freedom to actually, experiment, to innovate, and to drive change as needed.
Yeah, I think that's a good point to on the last one as well, right? With open source, you always know what the roadmap is because it's public and you can kind of check it out.
Well,
it's a different
if it
way.
doesn't work, no longer can a developer complain that the product doesn't do what they want, because if it doesn't, they can always contribute, write it themselves.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. Let's be a bit more concrete. If you say you kind of reconfigured your organization, what does that really mean? What did you do to enable them more agility?
So at the organisational level, what we've done is, we want to actually empower our employees. We've hired very, very smart people who have a lot of experience across multiple industries. And, to quote Steve Jobs, there's no point hiring smart people if you tell them what to do. So really, we've wanted to actually have a collaborative environment where we have transparency in our strategy, where we're going, and we value everyone's opinion. And it really does create major changes. I mean, never in my career have I been told that I'm wrong, more times. But when you actually have that type of open conversation, you start to get different perspectives, and then you're actually able to see where you need to go. And egos aside, it's a fantastic way of working.
Yeah, I can imagine in a company in Singapore, kind of this approach is quite different, right? Yeah.
It took a while to get people to do it, and occasionally you have to, throw out a really bad idea and just sort of see how far you can push them to the point that they'd say, I think you're completely crazy. But I've got it now. I've got a team who's very happy to be honest, and we're seeing the positive results of that, actually transparency.
Yeah, yeah. No, I can imagine if you kind of set the boundaries as in kind of, but then really encourage kind of that open dialogue is really good. How did you break the hierarchy as in from a top-down management? I assume that was probably traditionally the case.
That really was the biggest challenge. And, actually at the parent company, we've got a lot of people who really can see where the change of the organisation's going, and they do actually like the open and honest communication. But we had to start it actually at the ground. And by starting it at, on the level with the team where they could actually have that conversation, we started to see, positive results. It's not easy. Again, not everyone can truly embrace, being told that they're not quite right. So you've got to tread a little bit carefully. But if you do embrace that, you will see some positive results. Yeah.
That's good. In both cases, it kind of like shows a lot about transparent leadership and kind of taking a risk and kind of being out there. I think it's very admirable.
You have to take a risk.
Yeah.
I mean, the industry moves fast. If you keep doing it the same way you've always done it, you're going to end up, the same way a lot of companies have gone, where they've just disappeared.
Yeah, no, it's good. Let's close with a question for both of you, actually. We're just improvising here a little bit. What's your advice for the audience? If they're going through a digital transformation, what do they need to do?
Actually, there's probably two things. So at an organisational level, really do embrace open communication and transparency of what you're doing. If you have a problem, share it with the team. When you actually take the concepts of an open community and you apply it into an organisation, great things happen. At the technical level, automation. That's all I can say. I mean, right now we're in a stage where there's security risks popping up every single day of the week. We need to be able to change our business or offer new services faster than anything else. If you don't enable and embrace automation within your organisation, you're going to get left behind. If you've got to start your journey, that's the first place.
That's good advice, David.
Yeah,
Eugene, can I ask you the same
sure.
question?
I think from my perspective, Dave already answered most of it, but it's understanding that digital transformation using technology is a means to an end. In the end, you need to know where your end goal is and what you're trying to achieve. And technology is just part of that. It's really about people, process, technology, and all have to come together in order to give you that maximum value that the technology would bring. So that's a very important insight to remember.
Yeah, that's a very good point too. Yeah. All right, well, I appreciate your presence here and to share your innovation. I think this is part of being an open source. We're kind of aligned to open source or open organization. So appreciate coming up.
Thanks, Marco.
Thanks.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Thank you, Eugene. It's great to hear from two companies, and it's really, I think, personally inspiring when you see kind of these companies doing like a younger company and maybe a bit more of a older company and kind of how they can change things around. Really, really admirable. And I have the pleasure to work with customers the whole year, and kind of seeing these examples in and out, it's really, really cool to see. So let me talk about, when we talk about digital transformation, right, and kind of how do you go on a journey, right? I think we convinced a lot of customers, yes, we got to do something, right? How do we start, right? As in, it's probably by every customer is different, but they're kind of like, how do you approach this? And actually, David and Eugene gave some examples that we kind of talk quite a bit about, right? Now, react versus anticipate, right? A good company reacts, right? I gave you the example of a ski resort. What did other ski resorts do? They reacted, right? To react, that's not a bad thing, right? Sometimes you do need to react. But to react, you need a flexible infrastructure. You already need a team that can actually deal with change, right? If something happens, how do you react? I give you a little example from Red Hat, which I think is really the reaction. A few years ago, it's actually probably a long time ago, all of a sudden Oracle was a little bit upset about Red Hat, and they launched the Oracle Unbreakable Linux. You probably remember that, right? This is, 8 years ago. What happened at Red Hat? So this was Oracle World. We had a booth at Oracle World on the day before Oracle launched the Unbreakable Linux. So what happened at Red Hat, we have an email list. At that time, we were not that big, but it was like a few thousand people at Red Hat. It started a dialogue. It's like, well, they can't do that. They've been a partner. Why do they call it the Unbreakable Linux? They forked our distribution. It was a whole discussion. And then, how do we react? One engineer, a kernel engineer, came up, well, we should call it Red Hat Enterprise Linux the Unfakeable Linux. And that happened within hours. And what happened is we had a team in San Francisco at the Oracle Open World. At night, they went to a shop, print T-shirts, was saying Unfakeable Linux. Next day at the Oracle World, our guys were all dressed with the shirt Unfakeable Linux. This was a reaction time of just one day. It kind of was brainstorming. How do we react? We agreed on it, right? Keep in mind, the kernel engineer brought the idea, marketing jumped on it, we did it, it looked pretty cool. That's a reaction, right? But you gotta have that fundamental, that foundation in place that you can actually react. Now, a great company actually leads the change, or anticipates and leads it even, right? And we got some bad examples. If you're familiar with the video store Blockbuster, right? That's probably the best example, or the worst example, that they didn't even react, right? And certainly they didn't anticipate the change, right? They kind of just kept, well, we do what we do, right? We give you video and you come back to the store. They didn't realize like a Netflix was totally disrupting them. At first with their DVDs, much more convenient, and then with streaming, right? But so, just as an example, right? But that's react, anticipate. Now, the other thing that we heard from actually, I think, both of the gentlemen, top-down versus bottom-up, right? What does that mean? Top-down is kind of the plan, prescribe, execute, kind of like management, kind of tells people what to do. Bottom-up is you let the ground kind of like great ideas develop there and kind of move it up. I'm not saying you should just move from one to the other extreme, right? You got to balance it, right? I give you an example on the bottom-up. We do a lot of bottom-up planning. We ask the ground staff basically, how much, what do we need to invest next year? I did this a few years ago, and my team at that time was maybe, let's say, 600-700 people. And we kind of did one of these exercises, how do you scale the organization bottom up? They came back with numbers that, let's say it was 600, they came back and said, Marco, you got to hire additional 1,200 people. So sometimes bottom up, maybe not the super approach, but you got to balance it, right? You got to get, again, as I said many times, you got to set the framework and the boundaries, and you'll actually get the better ideas if you actually really get it from the bottom up. You obviously, if you're bottom up, you got to be prepared from a top down or from a management perspective to support it and to enable that, right? So that the good ideas actually can actually survive and actually go forward. Now let's talk about go big or start small, right? And again, we're talking about how do you start a digital transformation. You've been probably in companies that there is all of a sudden a big transformation project. I'm not saying that's wrong. I've just seen many examples that there is so the big, like you bring one of the consulting firms in, you start a big transformation project. We at Red Hat did that many years ago, and it was too big. The resistance started, it was like trying to change everything at the same time. Resistance started everywhere, it didn't go anywhere. Now the other area is start small, right? Pick a team that's really maybe agile, maybe hire them, right? Give them a bit more freedom, kind of let them work on a project, on a program, to kind of actually bring this out. It sounds very simple, but if you actually have that done and you do it like in an isolation and kind of let it grow, it's actually probably faster than the other approach. Now again, in my experience, if you start too small and something that is actually not of value for the rest of the business, doesn't make sense. So you got to pick a project that's small enough but has an impact and it can shine in the company, and from there you can actually go and start running. Now, this is not just, I'm not talking here like as a preacher. This is how we actually run and lead our company, right? And we hope we can help you in the journey. This is not something we sell, so you can't go to our sales team and say, hey, I want to buy the consulting on open organization. We don't do that. There is actually, we published a book, Open Organization, from Jim Whitehurst that talks about these things. But we don't sell this. This is something that we want to share because I think it's the better way and it helps you. Now, it's how we have been able to predict what's next, right? That's kind of the, for us, I'll give you a few examples here, right? React, anticipate, right? And you got to kind of predict what's changing, right? And deal with that, right? And that's, I think, how you actually keep going as a company, right, in the digital transformation. I gave you the example of the ski resort. They did this 3 years ago. This year, actually, it's not going very well for them, right? Because all of a sudden, it kind of lost that steam. The other resorts actually innovated as well. So it kind of lost some steam, right? Now, predicting that, what's next, right, is something. I'll give you an example here. Red Hat has been very good at anticipating trends and answer them with technology. Why? This is not because we as a management team are smarter. This is actually because of the way we are engaged in the open source communities. And we see, even in communities that we are not actually building into our products, we are involved and we see what is going on. I give you an example that's actually a bit back, is with RHEL 5, Red Hat Enterprise Linux 5, we were the first company introducing a hypervisor, so virtualization in the product. In the first version of RHEL 5, we introduced a Zen hypervisor. Zen was an open source project sponsored by a company, and it was promising initially. But then our engineers that were in the community kind of got a bad vibe, as in like, the company behind it, maybe changing to more a proprietary model. They probably want to do kind of the open core model. Some is open source, some is closed. You got to pay them license fees. So it wasn't the community kind of got it pretty quickly that there is a change going on. So what we did, we were looking around, what's the alternative? The alternative was a small startup in Israel called Kubernetes. They had a KVM hypervisor. KVM was actually accepted upstream already by Linus, and it got a lot of traction. It was a small company. And we actually acquired that company. And within RHEL 5, we made a switch, and maybe some of you remember, we made a switch, we introduced a second hypervisor, we let customers choose which hypervisor, and RHEL 6, we actually got rid of the Zen hypervisor because the community was, at that time, literally broken. So that's kind of predicting trends. Now, it's also, I'll give you another example, right? Kind of the leadership in OpenStack, right? When OpenStack started, remember, it was between Rackspace and NASA that started this as a project very early. Some of our engineers got engaged in that, right? It wasn't because we were planning to do OpenStack. This was way before. And kind of predicting is like, hey, this community really is up to something innovative. Eventually, we kind of engaged more and more, made a product out of it. OpenShift, if you remember OpenShift, before version, the older versions, it wasn't based on Kubernetes. We tried, OpenShift started as an acquisition called Makara many years ago, and from there it evolved, and we've rewritten OpenShift, I think, twice so far, because the trends and the technology changed. Now it's based on Kubernetes, and we had to shift that as well, and that wasn't so much reaction, it was actually a prediction, hey, something is changing, we got to be on front of that. And that means, think about, you have a product, OpenShift, and you get a new version, you got to rewrite it with a different kind of a scheduling system called Kubernetes. It's a different programming language. You take a lot of risk in doing that with the customers, but it's the right thing because we can ride on something that we believe in the active open source communities. Now, with that, I hope this gives you a perspective as in how we actually operate and being engaged, being open, being out there with our communities, that we can actually, communities externally, internally, to kind of see how this journey is. So if we share, and this sounds maybe a little bit naive, but we truly believe in this, if we share good ideas, we get much further, we can all be more successful. With that, I appreciate the attendance, and I hope you have a great day here at the Red Hat Forum.